Good evening, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you tonight to share a little bit more about me and my faith journey in this formation time that I'm calling Walking with Elizabeth, a personal reflection on infertility, faithfulness, and living in a season of anticipation. I found my place in the Episcopal Church when I was in elementary school. And one of my most vivid childhood memories and teenage memories of Sunday school was during the season of Advent. And each week, we would hear a different version of the story of Christmas, and we were asked to identify with a character in the story. We were basically asked, who are you in today's story? And we were in elementary school. A lot of the young boys really seemed to always want to be shepherds. I didn't really understand it at the time, but now that I'm thinking back on it, I think it's because we heard like these stories about shepherds and they were fighting wolves, and that was something that little boys thought was cool and something that they thought they wanted to or could maybe possibly do. I don't know. As for us girls, we always would come up with these long drawn out answers about why we felt we were Mary. I think deep down, we all kind of hoped if we came up with the right answer, that maybe we would score that coveted role in the Christmas pageant. As I got older, this Advent practice was something I took with me when I left the comforts of my church home. At Baptist Bible College, I strongly identified with Joseph, standing up for what I thought was right during times when my colleagues at school strongly doubted me. During a period of discernment, I found myself trying to trust and listen like Mary. And if I'm being really, really honest, there are many times in my adult life where I may have been an innkeeper, unsure of where my faith fit into the bigger story of the busyness that was going on all around me. It was never in a million years that I thought that I would become Elizabeth. The first chapter of the Gospel according to Luke is the only place that we hear the story of Elizabeth and her husband Zechariah. We are told that Elizabeth was a descendant of the priestly lineage of Aaron. She was raised in the worship, prayers, customs, reverence, and teachings under Jewish law. She was fully exposed to all of the feasts and the offerings and the sacrifices and the daily demands of Jewish priestly life. Her reputation as a righteous Jewish woman preceded her and would have made her a highly sought after wife for a priest, a role she would fulfill when she would marry her spiritual and social equal, Zechariah. The two of them lived near the great temple of Jerusalem, and together they would witness the inner workings of the temple, both positively and negatively, as temple worship began to see corruption rising. Elizabeth actively made the choice to remain steadfast in her faith in God, making God her ultimate desire over the power and riches, or the seduction of the power and riches that could have been afforded to her and her husband at the time. My husband, Brian, and I, we met while we were serving together at summer camp at Dayspring. He was on the worship team, and I was serving as a youth ministry intern for Bishop Lipscomb. My job title ultimately put me in charge of counseling staff and making sure that counselors in training actually got trained. Our first summer together was filled with worship and mission work and service in the church. Our relationship formed while we were living in the bounds of a Christian community. And developing a prayer life quickly became central to our relationship. This came in handy when the summer ended and he returned to school at the University of Central Florida, and I returned to Pennsylvania for my junior year at Eastern University, right outside of Philadelphia. The common experience of living together in community with others and worshiping together helped keep our relationship intact as we traversed a long-distance relationship for about 2 years. Together, we knew the inner workings of the church. In fact, I'm pretty positive our first time being back together after being apart at college was at a weekend-long anti-racism training for diocesan leadership. Our common friends were churchgoers. Our confidants were clergy members. And as a college couple, we spent more time in places of worship than we did in bars. Prayer became a central figure in our relationship as we listened and tried to best be obedient to the calls that God had for our life. Mine to youth ministry and missions, and Brian's to law enforcement, with a particular draw towards community policing and development work. We tried our best to keep God central in our relationship, and the church played a huge role in that. Our wedding photos can boast more clergy on the altar than members in our wedding party. In Luke chapter 1, verse 6, Elizabeth is said to be righteous before God and living a blameless life. This didn't mean that Elizabeth was without sin, but that she took the appropriate measures if and when she did sin. People looked to Elizabeth and her husband as an example, but one thing loomed over them. Elizabeth was barren. In Jewish society at the time, it was necessary for Elizabeth to give birth to a son in the case of her husband's death. That son would provide for her and prevent her from becoming destitute in her old age. Children were also considered a sign of God's blessings and favor. And having no children was a sign of disfavor, which often led to social scorn and ridicule. Much like both Sarah and Hannah in the Old Testament, Elizabeth would have been subjected to the gossip and ridicule of other Jewish women who would have wondered what her secret sin may have been. There were things that Brian and I didn't agree upon when we were dating or when we were engaged. In fact, there's a lot of things to this day that we still don't agree upon. But one thing we both knew early on and throughout our relationship was that we wanted to have children. And while the pressure to have children, to take care of me if something were to happen to my husband, wasn't really a concern, the societal pressure started to seep in very quickly after we were married. In fact, I'm pretty sure we didn't make it through our wedding reception before someone asked me when we were going to start having kids. And about 18 months into our marriage, we thought it was the time to try to start a family. That first month was filled with much anticipation as we waited to see what would be the first of many negative pregnancy tests. It was okay. It was just the first month. And that month turned into months, and then a year, and then years. Each month filled with prayers, anticipation, and letdown. The ridicule that we experienced wasn't the same as Elizabeth. No one outwardly questioned our faith or our standing with God. We did that all on our own. Our ridicule came in the seamlessly harmless questions of when and why. The comments that were meant to be encouraging, like you guys would be the best parents, or you can always try again next month. And my personal favorite, just relax. It will happen when you start trying. Have you ever tried to relax when one single thing is consuming the ins and outs of your everyday? It doesn't really work. Elizabeth is said to be faithful, putting her trust fully in God. I can only imagine because I've been there. The times when she came to God with questions, because they were my questions too. Why not me? What could I be doing better? Where is my faith lacking? Maybe if I prayed harder. For me, the fact that my body couldn't do the one thing that I was sure that God wanted me to do was overwhelmingly exhausting. The pings of jealousy and resentment towards friends and family who were experiencing easy and seamless pregnancies was emotionally draining. There were many sleepless nights and more tears than I ever thought I could possibly shed. Tears that I'm pretty sure I shared with Elizabeth. We were living our Advent experience, filled with waiting, filled with longing, filled with anticipation, as doctor after doctor couldn't tell us what was wrong. After pill was prescribed, and nothing seemed to work. As we all know, Elizabeth was eventually, after 60 years, able to conceive by divine gift. Thankfully for me and Brian, we also received a gift. And luckily for us, we didn't have to wait 60 years. We had the opportunity to seek fertility treatments, an opportunity that we prayed upon and agreed to try out first before seeking adoption, something that we both agreed was an equally exciting and valid way to build our family. And so we started our IVF journey. The Bible tells us that Elizabeth was secluded for the first 5 months of her pregnancy. That time of anticipation and fear for her son's well-being and probably for her own health and well-being helped to keep her secluded. The beginning of our IVF journey was a period of seclusion for me. As much as people celebrate pregnancy, nobody or hardly anyone talks about fertility treatments. This time became one of the loneliest times, both in my personal and spiritual life. We never talked about the fact that I was actively in the middle of fertility treatments, that my days were filled with pills and patches and doctor's appointments, and of course, those dreaded needles. Have you ever tried to give yourself a timed hormone injection in the bathroom stall of an amusement park during a youth ministry event? Ask me about how it works sometimes, because it was quite the experience. My poor coworkers and friends dealt with more mood swings and breakdowns out of left field than I probably even realized to this day. My first round of IVF didn't work. And I will never forget how dark and secluded of a place that was. That time was heightened on a Sunday morning when a well-meaning parishioner at church asked me, full of excitement, if I was pregnant because I had been gaining weight. Little did she know, and she still doesn't know to this day, that I had just found out the day before that my numbers weren't increasing, and the positive pregnancy test that we had gotten earlier in the week, the thing that we were so ready to celebrate and to share with the world, wasn't going to come to fruition. It wasn't until almost 2 years into active fertility treatments and our last attempt to try to have a biological child of our own, that we got the first glimpse of our son, Benjamin, at 10 days past conception. And 2 days later, we would get a peek at his brother Logan and his sister Eden. My time in seclusion and loneliness and in darkness, it didn't end when I got pregnant. And I imagine that Elizabeth's darkness and seclusion didn't end when she got pregnant either. The light entered for Elizabeth through her sharing her blessing and joy with Mary. Mary, who could understand the loneliness and exile of pregnancy as much as Elizabeth felt the loneliness and exile of infertility. For me, it ended when I was able to share with someone who could understand. A friend of mine from high school who I hadn't talked to in a really long time messaged me on social media and said, "Hey, this is kind of awkward, but I heard that you may have had a hard time getting pregnant. Can you tell me how that was for you? My husband and I are experiencing the same thing." And I was able to respond with love and courage and declare, "You're not alone." Elizabeth and Mary were alone in their experiences until they came together. And I felt alone until I could share light with someone facing the same dark situation. We're almost a week into Advent now. And while this is a time that is celebrated for some and is filled with excitement and joyous hope, for others, it may be dreaded and filled with darkness and despair. And still for others, it may be a period of seclusion and of doubts. But I've learned no matter who we relate to in the Advent verses or where we find ourselves along the journey to Christmas, the experience is best when it's shared. We share not just the despair of darkness, but we share the light of hope, slow, cautious, purposeful hope. Just like Elizabeth shared her hope for her children with Mary, and just like we are able to share our hope with others to bring a little light into their darkness. No matter which character you relate to in this amazing story of anticipation, of Advent, you too can share hope and light with others. And it is my hope that you do. Thank you for sharing this time with me tonight.